This is what it's going to feel like when you walk into the room. There'll be a music stand that has a sheet of paper on it that says what two scales in chromatic scale you're going to play. Pretend it's right here. You'll walk into the room. The judge will say, hello, good afternoon. On the stand, you'll see several sheets of paper, the first of which shows what scales you're going to play in what order, and then the chromatic. You may start when you're ready. You can choose to sit or stand. I'm going to play C and F because those are very common to pick. Then I'll do F without pausing or talking to the guy. No talking to the guy. He won't tell you to go on. Just play the next one. And then chromatic without waiting for him to prompt you. And then they'll say, okay, now flip over the sight reading and we'll have you play that now. And so on the screen, you'll see that I have my sight reading factory up. This is level 3. This is in the key of B flat major, or my C. I'll take my 30 seconds, study. Okay. I'm gonna play this slow because that's how you should approach your sight readings, somewhere between 68 and 80 beats per minute. Once you're done, he'll say, okay, you may exit the room, thank you. And then you exit the room. A couple of things when you're auditioning for all county band that you need to pay attention to. First off is the ranges for the instruments are a suggestion so that you can get the full amount of points awarded for each scale. There are a couple scales on a couple instruments that are much, much more difficult to perform than others. So much so that it's almost worth not spending a bunch of time on so that you can get all of your scales learned in a good way. For instance, clarinets, when it comes to your D scale, it takes you up all the way up to altissimo D, your D scale, concert C. So I would spend more time just learning that first octave really good, and then learn your other 4 scales in your chromatic perfectly. And if you have time, go ahead and add in that D second octave scale. All chromatic scales should be able to be performed pretty much perfectly and also to the ranges specified. However, I will tell you that there are kids who come in and do not play the full range. So it's difficult for the judges to really know if you're playing the full range if you subtract a note or two, because they're blind auditions. And that's unfortunate. Everybody should be able to play these things. But if you're struggling big time, but you want to audition for all county band, but you only can play like the middle octave of the chromatic scale, then just do that. Show up to all county band and do that half an like full octave, and not do the bottom lower notes and the higher upper notes. I'd say that's especially true for like trumpet, brass instruments that have trouble going up to that highest note up there. Consider taking a couple notes off of it and working up to that point in your practice sessions, and maybe you'll get there eventually. The main thing is you want it to be clean and accurate. So if you are having trouble with certain notes, and you get to the audition day, go ahead and subtract them out. All the scales that are major scales, the non-chromatic ones, those should be played really legato and not super hard tongued. That never sounds great, and it's not going to let your tone blossom into something that's pretty. Trombones, make sure you don't glissando through the notes, but that you also keep it loose enough so that you don't sound like burr, 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 burr. We don't want to hear that necessarily. Flutes, make sure you use the correct fingerings and the correct octaves. Fingered brass instruments, same deal. Use the correct fingerings and the correct octaves. Don't cheat and play the high notes with the wrong fingerings. When you learn your chromatic scale or you learn your major scales and you run into bumps because there's a lot of notes that are new, stop and work on those sections very slowly and deliberately until they're easy and the pattern is recognizable and memorized. For instance, I was showing clarinets today. I'm gonna go grab it. I was showing clarinets today. Okay, I'm just making sure you can see this thing. Let's go back just a little bit more. Yeah. Low E, F, G. Make sure you use the fingering that allows you to get through it the fastest, which is going to be where you hold the F key down here on the right hand. And then as you work upwards from here, I'm sorry, it's not a clarinet lesson. The goal there was to show you that if you have an area that you're not comfortable with, so I'm gonna shut up, right? So I want to work that out. Work that out so that it's easy and I don't have to think about it. Essentially, you need to be memorizing everything, but you can have your scale sheet for reference within the room. But if you're not memorizing everything, especially woodwind players, you're going to be playing things so slowly that you might actually mess up more in the moment. So try to memorize the scales and then have the sheet as backup in case you have like a mental lapse of reason. Don't try to be a hero either, like take the scale sheet in there, or if they don't allow you the scale sheet, then look at the scale sheet when you play, just to make sure that you don't allow nerves to get you in the moment and you totally forget something. I've had a lot of kids over the years do that. You need to practice sight reading a lot. Sightreadingfactory.com with our subscription. You should be practicing level 1 and all the keys that are available, B flat, E flat, A flat, F, and C. You should be practicing those a lot. I would say level 1, get it so that you don't have to study it before you play it. You should be able to just hit go on the new one and then just play it and not think. Level 2, you might have to look at a couple things, maybe take 10 seconds, but don't look at it very long. And if you do have to look at it for very long because it's hard, then you're not working enough on sight reading. Level 3 is where you actually should take 30 to 45 seconds to study something before you have to play it. Level 3 is a good benchmark. That's usually where some of the sight reading lands with certain instruments. When you're practicing sight reading, you want to record yourself, and you want to use a metronome. When you record yourself, you want to double check that you're playing the rhythms that are on the page correctly, especially with level 3 when you're probably not as sure about some of the syncopation, some like the things that go like 1 and 3 and 2, things like that. That's a tough rhythm for a lot of middle school students, and that's okay. So you want to listen to yourself and see if you're playing exactly with the click. You'll also want to listen back to see if you're making a good sound, that you're having dynamic contrast, which means getting louder and softer when you're supposed to, that you're tonguing the way that they want you to tongue, and that you're making a sound that you like. sight reading is a big part of your score, and it's the thing that keeps a lot of kids from getting into all county band. So the more you practice sight reading, the better, in my opinion. But do not skimp out on your other responsibilities, such as your scales and your chromatic scale. All these things make an entire package that needs to be sellable. With that said, most students are the worst at sight reading. So take your practice time and divide it into sections. So like if you have an hour to practice, spend like 30 minutes on sight reading, 10 to 15 minutes on your chromatic scale, and then the last 10 minutes, 5 minutes apiece on your major scales, because you're probably going to be pretty fluent with major scales, unless you're not. But if you're doing this work on a consistent basis, then your chromatic scale should be helping make your major scales easier because you're playing all the notes on the instrument. Remember to take breaks. Remember not to be too hard on yourself. Remember to take things slow enough in chunks that you can memorize it to some degree and learn the patterns. Don't try to learn the chromatic scale like this. That's an E. That's an F. And then do that for the entire chromatic scale. You don't want to be working on the chromatic scale like that. You want to learn like 3 notes and go E, F, G, E, F, F sharp. Okay, got that. Let's do it again. Okay, got it. That's easy. Okay, cool, got it. What's the next note? G, okay. Then work it like that and add progressively so that as you move better, you still feel good about yourself, that you're learning things fast and that they sound good. The more you work in large, big chunks, the less you're going to get done because it's just a lot. Okay. More to come, maybe, if there's more tips that I can think of. Tips for auditioning, they only want to hear you sound good. So if you go in there and let your nerves wreck you, that's semi-normal, but don't let it be the thing that stops you. Okay, good luck.